Hello viewers, welcome to a lecture series on marketing management, and in this very series we are going to talk about Consumer Protection Act 2019 and modern marketing. This is going to be part 1 of our lectures on this topic of Consumer Protection Act 2019 and modern marketing. This very topic is very pertinent today, and you must be thinking why on this very day we are talking about Consumer Protection Act 2019. So let me tell you that 15th March we have been celebrating as World Consumer Rights Day, and that is why this day becomes very significant. And since we are delivering this lecture on March 16, so I thought it very pertinent to have a discussion on the topic of the new Consumer Protection Act 2019, which has actually replaced the erstwhile Consumer Protection Act 1986. So this World Consumer Rights Day, which is celebrated annually on March 15th, it was for the first very time it was observed in 1983, and the purpose was to promote consumer rights and protest market abuses. So it was basically this particular day is dedicated, it is devoted to the rights of consumers worldwide, that across the globe consumers should be empowered enough against any kind of atrocities, against any kind of problems, and they should be reminded of their rights also, that they stand certain rights, and that is why I thought it pertinent to have a discussion on this very topic. And this very March 15th is rooted in US President John F. Kennedy's historic address to the Congress on March 15th, 1962, where John F. Kennedy formally outlined 4 key consumer rights, wherein he talked about right to safety, right to information, right to choice, and the right to be heard. So these were the 4 key consumer rights which were very much highlighted and discussed on the very day of World Consumer Rights Day, that is March 15th. And if we talk about the key history behind the day, includes certain activities, that why in 1962 John F. Kennedy gave this address. So it was the first he was the first world leader to formally address consumer rights. Prior to him, nobody else could ever think of discussing about the consumer rights. We have been talking about doctrine of cave tempter, where we say that let the buyer beware. Buyers were supposed to be aware of whatever they are buying, and they should always keep their eyes and ears open when they are going for making a purchase, as far as Sales of Goods Act 1930 is concerned in Indian scenario as well. So John F. Kennedy, he was the first world leader to formally address consumer rights, and it actually laid the foundation for modern global consumer movements. So whatever movements, whatever discussions, whatever deliberations or developments we are witnessing, it is basically it started on the foundation of that particular address by John F. Kennedy, which was delivered in 1962. So here comes the role of this particular day, that why it is celebrated as World Consumer Rights Day. So the reason is very simple, and that is something which I put in front of you. And this March 15th, the Global Federation of Consumer Groups, they launched the first official World Consumer Rights Day on March 15th, 1983, and they have actually ran the campaign for over 40 years. So for more than 4 decades they have been running this campaign, and if you go to their website, you would find that this day is used to mobilize action on emerging issues, the pressing issues, for instance plastic pollution or pollution rising due to use of excessive plastics, digital finance and artificial intelligence, with certain other themes chosen by members of Consumers International. And each year a specific theme is chosen by this particular forum, and for instance if I talk about the year 2025, they used a theme called a just transition to sustainable lifestyles, and in 2014 the theme was fair and responsible AI for consumers. So with that very theme they are celebrating, they are mobilizing action on emerging issues which the society is witnessing at large. So, National Consumer Rights Day, if I talk about the Indian scenario, we celebrate National Consumer Rights Day on 24th December every year, and it is celebrated in India annually on this very day to commemorate the enactment of the Consumer Protection Act 1986, which was the previous act before the recent enactment of Consumer Protection Act 2019. And this very day actually aims to spread awareness about consumer rights, including the right to safety, information, choice and redressal against unfair trade practices. So, my dear learners, when we talk about marketing in 21st century, wherein we consider the consumer to be a king or queen, we are willing to offer the royal services to our customers. We are not only willing to satisfy our customers, but we are on a mission to make them feel delighted, which means offering the services beyond their expectations. So, if you are fulfilling the expectations of a customer, it means you are doing something very minimum. Now, the marketers have started talking about making the customers feel delighted, make them feel that this can also be, make them get surprised, make them feel surprised that this can also be a service in this very segment, or this can also be a way of delivering a specific product to the customers, and this is the new order of the present day marketing. So, with this very idea, my dear learners, I thought that how to connect this Consumer Protection Act with that of present day marketing or 21st century marketing, or what we call as modern marketing. So, when I say that you have to stay relevant in the marketplace means marketing, I mean to indicate that yes, each and every action of yours should be pro consumers, it should be in favor of consumers, and that becomes very much relevant and very much significant when we are now having a new concept of prosumers, where the customers are not only acting as a customers, but they are also acting as a producer. So, they are co-creating a particular brand. Imagine that your customers are so much connected with your company, with your brand, that now they feel like connecting with the producer, they feel like co-creating a particular brand, they feel like co-creating a particular product. Forget about ignoring their rights. Now we are there to protect their rights, and for that certain enactments are also there. And Consumer Protection Act 2019 is one of the significant provisions, one of the significant enactments. So, before I proceed for Consumer Protection Act 2019, let me first tell you about Consumer Protection Act 1986. So, this new act of 2019, it was very much needed. Why so? Because the enactment which came in 1986, at that point of time the situation was entirely different. The situation of market, situation of customers, the condition, the economy, everything was not that developed as it is today, as far as Indian scenario is concerned. So, the erstwhile Consumer Protection Act, that is that was enacted in 1986, it had certain limitations, and those limitations, all those limitations, they have been eliminated, or you can say they have been taken care of by this new enactment of 2019. So, it has been enacted for the purpose of providing timely and effective administration, and also the settlement of consumer disputes and related matters. So, if consumers are having certain disputes or some other matters are there that need to be settled, and this enactment has robust provisions with regard to the settlement of consumer disputes and also the related matters. And when we talk about providing the timely and effective administration, that also is at the core of this particular enactment. And one more reason is there behind coming up with this new enactment is that the Consumer Protection Act 1986 came well before globalization, well before the adoption of new industrial policy by our country, and the LPG, liberalization, privatization and globalization, which were actually adopted by India as a country in 1991. So, after that lot of changes have taken place, and that is why this new enactment is with us. So, it is actually a legal force available to customers to enforce their right as a consumer. the Consumer Protection Act, it was initially enacted in 1986, as I told you, and it was implemented with effect from April 15th, 1987. So this, the old enactment, it was implemented with effect from 1987, but the bill was placed in the parliament in 1986, and eventually it became enactment in 1987. Afterwards, what happened? I am just letting you go to the history of this of erstwhile Consumer Protection Act, that there were certain amendments also, with the passage of time. Like in the month of December 2002, there was an amendment, and it was implemented with effect from 15th March 2003, which is actually World Consumer Rights Day. So lot of amendments were also there into this erstwhile Consumer Protection Act 1986, but further now it is amended in 2019 as the Consumer Protection Amendment Bill 2019. It is the outcome of that, and this 2019 Act was passed by the Indian Parliament, and it received the assent of the Honorable President of India on August 9th, 2019. So since August 9, 2019, we have this brand new enactment for consumers for the protection of the interest of consumers, that is called the Consumer Protection Act 2019. And this new act actually replaced the old Consumer Protection Act 1986. So this is in brief, as a background of this new Consumer Protection Act 2019, that what was there before this enactment. When this enactment of Consumer Protection Act 2019 was not there, was there something else? Yes, we had the previous enactment which came into the force in 1987, and that was known as Old Consumer Protection Act 1986. So this is the brief background of the present Consumer Protection Act 2019. Now when we talk about the enactment, there are certain definitions which are given in the act itself, like who are consumers, how do we define e-commerce, how do we define the marketplace. So when we go through the enactment, we find that the persons who buys any goods and hires or avails of any services. Now let me reiterate here that in terms of marketing, when we define a product, it includes services as well, because we define product as any offering which can satisfy the need of the customers, that is called product. It can be a person, place, activity, organization or idea. It can be in any form. Likewise, here also in this Consumer Protection Act, any person who buys any goods or hires or avails of any services for consideration, but does not include a person who obtains goods for resale. If you are obtaining goods for resale or goods or services for commercial purposes, then there you are not regarded as a consumer, because you are not buying it for the consumption, you are buying it for resale. So we have to understand the difference between a consumer and a retailer. Suppose if as a part of channels of distribution, if I am buying certain goods, in that case I am not going to get any protection under Consumer Protection Act 2019, because as per the definition of consumer in under the act, I am not the consumer if I am buying it for resale or I am buying goods or services for commercial purposes. So in that case I am not defined as consumer. So the definition of consumer is very much clear under the Consumer Protection Act 2019. And one more point is very significant here, that the consideration may be fully paid, partially paid, or it can be fully promised to be paid or partially promised to be paid. So either we make full payment or we make partial payment with a promise, or we can have any combination of these in order to settle the payment. So that is not a concern here, whether you have made the full payment or you have made the part payment. It is not going to have any impact on our right as a consumer. It can be fully paid, it can be partially paid, or there can be a promise to be paid or partially promised to be paid. So in the 1986 Act, the definition of a consumer was only limited to buying goods or services. It was very much limited. It was having a limited definition of buying goods or services, and it did not include specifically e-commerce transactions. And we all understand now that this present day marketing belongs to mobile marketing. We talk about m-commerce, we talk about e-commerce, and lot of purchase and sale, they are being conducted, they are being considered online. Rather, I would say it would not be like exaggerating a fact that most of the purchase or majority of the buying and selling, as far as consumers buying is concerned, it is being done online. So this very enactment, this very new enactment of 2019, it does include e-commerce transactions which were not included in the erstwhile Consumer Protection Act. So here, if you ask me about who is the consumer now, a consumer will now mean any person who buys any goods and hires any services, which shall include both. It will include not only the physical buying but also the online buying. If you are making any online buying or you are buying any product online, that will also include. So it includes e-commerce, m-commerce, or any online transaction which we are performing on any of the platforms or on any of the portals. So as far as defining consumer is concerned, consumer means any individual who buys any goods for a consideration which has been paid or promised, or partly paid and partly promised, or you are hiring or availing any service for a consideration which has been paid. Again, as far as the payment is concerned, for products and services both, the condition remains the same. Either you have paid or you have promised that you will pay later, or it is partly paid and partly promised. So according to the situation, the under any kind of or under any system of deferred payment, it will not affect your right as a consumer. So you are a consumer if you are buying any goods for a consideration which is either paid, or there is some system of deferred payment if you have resorted to, that will also include you in under the definition of consumers. So it includes any user of such goods other than the person who buys such goods or hires of any services for consideration paid, or promised or partly paid or partly promised under any system of deferred payment, when such use is made with the approval of such person. So if you are taking approval from the seller, if seller is agreeing to that payment term, there is no problem. The only consideration is that you should buy the product for using, not for resale or for any commercial purposes. Now the question comes, who is not a consumer? This is also very important, that once we know that how do we define consumers, we should also know that what are the conditions when a consumer is not considered as consumer under the Consumer Protection Act 2019. For instance, a person buying goods for resale. If I am buying any goods or services for resale, if I am buying a particular product for resale, it means I cannot avail the rights which are being prescribed under the Consumer Protection Act 2019. The reason is very simple, because I do not fulfill the prerequisites of being called as a consumer, and this enactment is for protecting the rights of consumers only. So unless I become a consumer, I won't be getting any kind of protection under the relevant provisions of Consumer Protection Act 2019. Suppose if a person is buying goods for any commercial purposes, then too the person is not considered as a consumer. Or a person receiving goods or services free of cost without any consideration, or getting it as a gift, he or she will again not be considered as a consumer, because there is no consideration which is being paid. Or there is another condition where you are not considered as a consumer, if a person is availing personal services under a contract. For instance, the service by employees, maid servants, etc., they are not included under the definition of a consumer, so they are not being called as consumer, and that is why they don't have any they don't get protected under the provisions of Consumer Protection Act 2019. Now, since I have been talking about a lot of protections and rights of consumers which are being defined, which are already given under the Consumer Protection Act, it's time for us to know what are those rights, what is the relevance of those significant rights. So the enactment is providing 6 significant rights to the consumers. Now we must go through each and every right when we talk about the Consumer Protection Act, and in case your that particular right is not being honored, you have certain solutions, certain remedies under the relevant provisions of Consumer Protection Act, wherein you can go for getting those rights restored. If your seller is not honoring those rights, you stand a chance to stay protected as per the relevant provisions of Consumer Protection Act 2019. Now, what is the first and the foremost right as a consumer? I would say that information is power. If you are taking informed decisions, if you have complete information about the product, then only you can not only avail that particular the qualities or the utilities of that product, but you can also stay alert. So you have the first and the foremost right is that right to have information. Now, information regarding what? Information regarding the quantity, quality, purity, potency, price and standard of goods or services. So you need not only, you need to know that the product which you are buying, how much quantity you have received after making a certain payment. So the quantity should also be mentioned on the what you call as a label which is being placed on the product. So the labeling must have these informations which are supposed to be disseminated to the customers. So the quantity need to be mentioned. About the quality also, suppose if there are certain ingredients which you are using, so those ingredients should also be mentioned. Purity, regarding purity, if any standard is being followed, that also is supposed to be mentioned. The potency, the price, and if there is certain standard which is being followed in our country, that also need to be informed to the customers that yes, it is being informed. For instance, if it is the product is having ISI marking, that then International Standard Institute marking should also be there, whether it is ISI marked or not. If it is a food product, then it must have a the certification from FSSAI, that is Food Safety and Standard Authority of India. So those standards of goods or services must be reflected, must be printed on the label of a product. Second is that you need to right to stay protected, a right to protection. Now protection from what? Protection from hazardous goods and services. If that particular product is having certain conditions or certain points where it can cause some hazard to the customer, that need to be cautioned, that need to be mentioned. For instance, if I am buying a medicine and if it is under a scheduled drug category, the label must contain this information that it is a scheduled drug, and that medicine need to be taken with all precautions under the supervision of a physician or a doctor or a certified doctor. And that is why most of the medicines, they are being sold out on prescription, on the basis of prescription only. Unless you produce the prescription, you don't get that medicine. So you have right to stay protected from hazardous goods and services. If the product has some possible hazards, that need to be mentioned. That is why most of the products, they also tell us how to use it, how to make use of that particular product. And that is why that information booklet is also provided when you are buying a particular product. So this is another right which you are supposed to avail as a consumer, a right to stay protected. So right to have information, a right to stay protected, these two rights I had discussed. The third one is a right to be protected from unfair or restrictive trade practices. This is also a very significant right, that I should stay protected from unfair trade practices. There should not be any false promises which are being made by the marketers. So I should stay protected from unfair or restrictive trade practices. And here, my dear learners, I would like to tell you that earlier in India we had MRTP Act, Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Act 1969, which was later replaced by the Competition Act 2002. So we got Competition Act in place of MRTP Act, and when MRTP Act was there, it also used to talk about monopolistic trade practices, restrictive trade practices and unfair trade practices, which we used to classify like MTP, RTP and UTP. So unfair trade practices, we should stay protected from unfair and restrictive trade practices. So it is a right of the consumer. If there are certain trade practices which are restricted by the government, I have the right as a consumer to stay protected from those practices. So whatever is unfair or restrictive trade practices, I should stay protected from that. I will tell you in detail when we will discuss the relevant sections of the Consumer Protection Act 2019. I will tell you in detail what do we mean by the term unfair or restrictive trade practices. We will also go through certain case laws which are supposed to be taught while we are having a classroom discussion. The next right is right to have a variety of goods or services at competitive prices. We call it right to have a choice. So as a customer, I should have a variety of goods or services at competitive prices. We all know that competition is bound to create excellence. So as a customer, I stand a right to choose from all the available options. So I should have a right to have a variety of goods or services at competitive prices. And the next one is right to have the right to consumer awareness. So I need to have that consumer awareness also, and that is why in India we have been having a campaign called Jago Grahak Jago. So there are multiple campaigns, and that campaign was so powerful that still everybody recalls that there is a campaign about which actually talks about the rights of the customers. That also I will discuss with you in detail in due course of our discussion. So my dear learners, these are some of the significant rights of consumers for which this Consumer Protection Act advocates, it actually talks about. So Consumer Protection Act 2019 is basically I would say that it is basically a brand new enactment to protect the interest of consumers in 21st century marketing. It has been drafted and implemented with a view to accommodate all the recent changes which market has gone through over several decades, and that is why the erstwhile enactment was not sufficient to cater to the requirement of the general public or the consumers per se, and that is why we have got this new enactment. So my dear learners, in this very part of my discussion on the topic of Consumer Protection Act 2019 and modern marketing, we talked about the new enactment, the background of it, and also the 6 significant rights of consumers which are being protected, which are supposed to be protected under the present enactment. So with this I am concluding this very lecture of mine. Thank you so much.